Shorebirds in Florida are losing habitat. Living shorelines are part of the solution. You're listening to The Wrap from Central Florida Public Media. I'm Brendan Byrne. This time of year, young families of seabirds and shorebirds along Central Florida's coasts are starting to take flight. But many species are struggling with habitat loss, from threats like storms and rising tides to development. Nationally, American oyster catchers are actually making some bounds. Here in Florida, the shorebird is holding steady, but still classified as threatened.
While we are seeing improvements in the population size due to all of the work that we've done to increase reproductive outcomes and reduce threats to nesting birds, at some point we will be limited by available habitat.
But there's lots of potential to restore and enhance oyster catcher habitats along Florida's Atlantic coasts, where young oyster catchers are looking for mates more often than other parts of the state. Hear more about those efforts. That's ahead on The Wrap, the big stories this week from Central Florida Public Media. But first, these headlines. Orange County Mayor Jerry Deming says an updated agreement with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement is coming soon to the county commission. Meanwhile, as Central Florida Public Media's Joe Burns reports, the county is getting paid just 61% of its per diem for ICE inmates at the jail.
Since January, about 1,500 people have been detained for ICE at the Orange County Jail, most for a day or two. More than 600 had no criminal charges. Orange County, like others throughout Florida, has an agreement to work with ICE. It also has an interlocal service agreement, or IGSA, to house ICE detainees. Mayor Deming says most Florida jails are run by sheriffs who are unified in their support for immigration enforcement.
The handful of those remaining jails that are run by the counties, we've kind of been sucked up into the vortex of this willingness to cooperate at all extent possible.
Demings won't say what the new ICE agreement requires. A jail official says it involves transportation. Joe Burns, Central Florida Public Media.
The first tropical system of the 2025 Atlantic hurricane season developed over the Atlantic Ocean earlier this week. Meteorologist Megan Borowski from the Florida Public Radio Emergency Network says that the tropical storm, named Andrea, poses no threat to land.
Right, so Andrea is a weak tropical storm. Its location is over the North Atlantic Ocean, over 1,000 miles northeast of Bermuda and over 1,000 miles west of the Azores. We don't expect the storm to retain its strength very long, as it will be encountering cooler waters, and it should weaken into a tropical depression with winds less than 39 miles an hour by tomorrow. Regardless, Andrea is over the open waters and will remain far from land, so no threat to us at all from this system.
The hurricane season is getting off to a late start as the first named system typically forms by June 20th. The season overall is expected to exhibit above-average activity. Orange County Schools' parents, students, and educators are speaking out against the district removing books off a list of over 50 books the State Department of Education has called, quote, pornographic. Stefana Farrell is the director of the Florida Freedom to Read Project and a mom of two in the district. She says several of these books had already been reviewed in a book review committees and approved for some high schoolers. She's calling on the board to replace the books for now and for the Joint Administrative Procedures Committee to weigh in on whether or not these actions are lawful.
But this new interpretation by both the Attorney General, the Commissioner, and the State Board of Education to say that you can ignore your process and ignore your committee review process and ignore your local community standards and just outright remove these books because we told you to, that seems unlawful to me.
Along with Orange, Osceola County schools have also pulled some of the titles off the list preemptively. Governor Ron DeSantis and other supporters of these policies say young children should not be exposed to age-inappropriate content in schools. The first astronauts in more than 40 years from India, Poland, and Hungary arrived at the International Space Station on Thursday, ferried there by SpaceX on a private flight. The capsule launched from Kennedy Space Center on Wednesday and arrived at the station Thursday. The crew of four will spend 2 weeks at the orbiting lab performing dozens of experiments. America's most experienced astronaut, Peggy Whitson, is the commander of the visiting crew. She worked for Axiom Space, the Houston-based company that arranged the chartered flight, after retiring from NASA. These stories and more on our website. Visit cfpublic.org. Looking for reliable news and engaging stories this summer? Central Florida Public Media is here for you 365 days a year thanks to our sustainers. Join our Summer Sustainer Challenge to help us reach 100 new or rejoining monthly supporters. Your sustaining gift powers our mission, and we've got a summer thank you gift for you. Learn more and support at cfpublic.org. This time of year, young shorebird families along Central Florida's coasts are starting to take flight. But species like the American oystercatcher are struggling with habitat loss, as Central Florida Public Media's Molly Durig reports.
I'm on a boat in the Mosquito Lagoon, where Linda Walters, a marine biology professor at the University of Central Florida, is leading a small crew working on what's called a living shoreline.
It is the least destructive way to protect a shoreline.
Walters calls it low-tech, using more natural materials like native plants and biodegradable wave breakers to stabilize the shore against erosion.
As opposed to using any sort of hard armoring, which would be a seawall or putting really large rocks out.
Seawalls can also help fend off erosion, but one big drawback to that hardening approach is it can also harm valuable wildlife habitat. For oystercatchers, a species Florida classifies as threatened, the native mangrove trees and Spartina marsh grass being planted along this shoreline form one piece of a delicate puzzle, or to steal a term from Walters, a habitat mosaic.
The oystercatchers, they can use a living shoreline as the high ground that doesn't get wet at high tide.
Oystercatchers also need to be near their favorite food. That means oyster reefs, another critically imperiled lagoon habitat Walters works to restore.
That's the biggest kind of like existential threat to the species is there going to be habitat for them to live in?
That's Shiloh Schulte, a senior shorebird scientist at Manomet Conservation Sciences and coordinator of a national oystercatcher working group.
Shorebirds as a species group are declining rapidly, and oystercatchers are one of the few that's not.
Schulte says nationally there are nearly 15,000 oystercatchers today, up from about 10,000 in 2008. That may not sound like a huge jump, but with populations declining for more than 200 other North American bird species, conservationists count it as a win. That said, it's a delicate balance. In Florida, oystercatchers are managing to hold steady despite shrinking habitat. Janelle Brush leads seabird and shorebird research at the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission.
Habitat losses, it's on my mind a lot. That's the most critical threat that I think we're facing.
Habitat loss from things like storms, rising high tides that flood out nests, and human interference.
The more developed an area you have, the less suitable habitat that you have that's available for species like oystercatchers to nest.
Just up the coast, about 25 miles north from the Mosquito Lagoon, construction crews in Ormond by the Sea are building a buried seawall covered up by sand dunes and vegetation. It's what Stetson University's Jason Evans would call a hybrid mechanism to combat erosion.
Trying to figure out how to slow and stabilize erosion within a natural environment that naturally erodes. And that's like the really big dilemma.
A dilemma Evans helps coastal communities to solve. Evans says while theoretically it makes sense to want to hold a shoreline in place to protect the property behind it.
Just as soon as you stabilize something, there's going to be a follow-on consequence somewhere else.
Like to potential shorebird habitat.
But we've simplified these ecosystems, right? We've gone in, destroyed enormous amounts of coastal wetlands in Florida for putting in these seawalls.
Evans says hybrid solutions like the buried seawall can be an effective middle ground. Right now, researchers at UCF are working on a model to help determine where in Florida living shorelines might work best. Meanwhile, the future of federal funding that's long-fueled oystercatcher restoration work is in limbo. But Brush with FWC is hopeful. She says in the world of conservation, uncertainty is nothing new.
There's always opportunities. You just have to look for them.
Molly Durig, Central Florida Public Media.
Before this story aired, Manomet senior shorebird scientist Shiloh Schulte died in a helicopter crash while working in Alaska. That's it for The Wrap this week. This podcast is produced by Central Florida Public Media with assistance from News Director LaToya Dennis and Digital Director Ryan Ellison. This week's script was edited by Molly Durig. I'm Brendan Byrne. This is The Wrap.